be nice if I could touch your body. I know not everybody has got a body like you, but I gotta think twice before I give my heart away. And I know all the games you play because I play them too. Oh, but
He's certainly one of the most interesting and intriguing pop stars of his era.
The man who invented the phrase doing a George Michael, which is to successfully transform yourself from a teen pop idol into a global superstar.
George Michael is a troubled pop genius, basically.
George Michael was born Georgios Kyriakos Panayiotou in 1960s London.
George Michael was the son of first-generation Greek Cypriot immigrants to London. And this meant that George was brought up in a very loving environment with the traditionally quite strict, quite aloof, quite remote Greek father.
His mum was British and I think she was a dancer. She had some kind of showbiz connection early on.
I think what's clear about George from the very beginning is that he wants to be a pop star. Apparently he was kind of busking on the underground and things, really kind of wanting to kind of make a splash and get into music.
George attended Bushey Mead School where he first met Andrew Ridgeley, who took him under his wing.
They met at school, they formed a bond, and that bond has lasted them for the rest of their lives.
After a short time spent together in a ska punk band, George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley decided to form their own group, Wham, with George taking on the majority of the songwriting and instrumentation. For their first single, Wham Rap, George looked to America and the then underground rap scene for inspiration.
Hey, everybody take a look at me. I've got street credibility. I may not have a job, but I have a good time with the boys that I meet down on the line.
What Wham did is capture a certain element of British culture in the early 80s, which nobody else did. And this was aspirational working class culture. It was completely Thatcherite.
What you have with Wham Rap is two good-looking guys articulating the kind of the ennui of the teenage existence without any immediate political context, but from a social point of view, you get it. You are the guy who is 18, 19, and you're on the dole, and you don't really have any interest in politics, but you get the idea of how boring that life is.
There was a youth culture at the time called casuals, which is a bit like the mods of the 1960s, where young working-class men and women were all about labels. You know, it was all about Italian labels and looking sophisticated and going on foreign holidays and having a garage with a door that automatically went up. Suburban, aspirational, working-class culture, and nobody else had captured that.
Upon the release of their second album, Make It Big, Wham indeed followed their own suggestion and became international superstars. Lead single Wake Me Up Before You Go Go saw the band ditch the political subtext of their first album, and Make It Big went #1 around the world.
You put the boom boom into my heart. You send my soul sky high when your loving starts. The jitterbug into my brain. It goes to bang, bang, bang till my feet do the same.
They were providing froth, but it was absolutely quality froth. And that's why people love them.
You can't help but love a lot of their songs. They're so upbeat as well. They just instantly get you. As soon as you hear them, they're instantly memorable.
Wake me up before you go. Don't leave me hanging on like a yo-yo.
These songs, these poppy little ditties, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, they've stood the test of time. They still sound as fresh and as silly and as great as they did at the time.
The other thing about those two boys is that they're extremely good looking, and that definitely helps.
In 1984, George released his first solo single, Careless Whisper. Unlike previous Wham releases where George had solely written the material, Careless Whisper was co-written by Andrew Ridgeley, and upon its US release, it was included on Make It Big and sold under Wham's name.
Careless Whisper was kind of an early sign of the slightly more serious direction that he was heading in, a lot more smooth and slightly more serious and a little bit more melancholic and just not all-out colour pop.
It has the right amount of personal engagement. You can put yourself into that song, which is the sign of a good song, is that you can relate to it, you can engage with it personally.
I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet have got no rhythm.
It's actually a brilliant song. It's a brilliant ballad, basically. And it's so sentimental, I mean, preposterously sentimental.
2 years later, Wham made an amicable split. George had begun to provide vocals for other artists, notably on Elton John's Nikita during his time with Wham, and he was keen to move towards a more adult market.
He'd been frustrated by Wham for a time, not frustrated with Andrew, but by the things which made Wham great, by their frothiness, by their poppiness. And for a solo career, he had to move in a different direction. He'd seen how his old heroes, such as Elton John, had built solo careers over a period of time, and essentially they'd done it by not forgetting pop, but by moving towards a more adult area.
His first release, fully under his own name, was a one-off project with Aretha Franklin. I Knew You Were Waiting For Me was not written by George, but gave him the opportunity to sing with an idol.
I would say that George Michael would have been a fan of Black American music. I mean, I think you can hear that pretty directly.
I think he was quite influenced by Aretha Franklin's soul and Marvin Gaye, and also Elvis in terms of a performer.
I would also put into the equation people like Stevie Wonder, probably Donny Hathaway, who's a slightly less known name, but very, very important, and actually sings in a reasonably similar style. So that's where I would think his influence comes from.
In 1987, George released I Want Your Sex. The track was the first single from his upcoming debut album, and expectations were high. To highlight his transition from boy band to adulthood, the video and song were more mature in tone, and the video was censored upon its release for this reason.
I Want Your Sex was banned, his first single, by many radio stations. But I mean, what great publicity that is. What a great first statement in a way. What other way to say, kind of, I'm here and I'm a solo artist and I want to be taken seriously?
It's a very clear statement to say, all right, enough of that youthful stuff. I'm now serious, but I'm also edgy. He was never, ever edgy before. Absolutely not. Couldn't be less edgy. I mean, Careless Whisper. These were songs that were absolutely at the heart of mainstream British life, Heart FM or whatever. And then he brings out this song called I Want Your Sex, which is actually a fairly straightforward pop song, and it's a stupid title as well, because it doesn't actually mean anything.
I want your sex.
But it was so overt, having sex in the title, that he was very clearly making a statement. So I think it was a good marketing ploy as much as anything.
It was a good introduction to him, in the sense that it unveiled this new, funky George Michael.
Baby!
I Want Your Sex was a commercial success, despite being banned on the airwaves, and entered the top of the charts around the world. The follow-up single, Faith, would do even better still.
You mean every word you say. I can't help but think of yesterday and another who tied me down to Loverboy rules.
Why is Faith a good song? Because it has a guitar. This, again, is really important. Such is the dominance of synthesizers and synthesized music during the early 80s that you really don't hear guitars on pop records. You hear them on rock records, but in your top 40, in its most middle-of-the-road sense, the guitar does not exist. So what happens is he comes along and he's got this thing with this acoustic guitar. So immediately it sounds different to everything around it.
It's a very unusual song because it's so minimal. It's a bit Elvis-ish. There's nothing to it. It's a little bit like what Prince was doing at the time with Alphabet Street. It's similar, you know, it's just a beat, really. And then that syncopated way that he sings it's very, very effective.
It's one of the defining videos of the age, the kind of tight jeans and the big hollow body guitar and the leather jacket, kind of a polished Elvis look.
He's kind of like very manly in the video. It's kind of, he's trying to say, I'm not a little boy anymore. And he's using a really kind of rock and roll sound, very rhythmic. I think it's a brilliant track. It's instantly catchy as well.
'Cause I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith. Because I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith.
George Michael's first solo album, Faith, had 6 top 5 singles that helped it dominate the charts worldwide. George had written and produced nearly every track. To date, it has sold over 25 million copies.
There were so many sides to George Michael on this album, which is why he could release so many singles of it, and there'd be success with those singles. Each one showed that George Michael wasn't what you thought he'd been with the previous single.
After the massive success of Faith, there was a weight of expectation for Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1. But for George, it was key for him to be taken seriously as a songwriter.
I won't let you down. I will not give you up. Gotta have some faith in the sound. It's the one good thing that I've got.
You play Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1 next to anything by Wham, and it sounds like not just a different era, it sounds like artists from another planet. Freedom 90, it's an interesting song because it sounds unusually upbeat for George in this period. But if you listen to the lyrics, then it's an extremely cynical take on the machinations of stardom and what happens to people who inadvertently sell their soul, as I think George had been very much aware that he'd done.
Freedom is him just trying to kind of draw a line under his previous persona.
Was saying, you know, you can't control me. I'm going to get away from my boy band past and I'm going to do it my own way. And I think that was the first time he started to really move away from his kind of record label and be quite kind of anti-establishment really for the time.
Sometimes the clothes do not make the man. All we have to do now is to take these lies and make them true somehow.
The video features all the defining visual elements of his previous incarnation being exploded. And obviously it's got all the supermodels of the day, which is just a big flex of the muscle, really, just showing how much power he could get into the video and how seriously people were taking him as an artist and just what a big deal he was, really.
It was the beginning of George Michael being taken seriously. He was always taken seriously as a pop star. You know, he'd been a very successful pop star. But it was the first time he was taken seriously as a songwriter. And it was a good album, actually.
He put the Wham thing behind him forever.
Despite the album's Volume 1 tag, the planned follow-up Listen Without Prejudice Volume 2 was scrapped. George and Sony, who had taken over his label Columbia, had entered a legal battle. Too Funky was marked for Volume 2, but George donated it to the AIDS awareness project Red Hot and Dance. The song would be the last he would release through Columbia.
Show you heaven if you let me. Hey, you're just too funky for me.
George was always a combative character. In the very early days of Wham, he'd had to undergo a very lengthy court case against his first record company. He's a man who's not afraid to go to legal recourse to underpin what he sees as his rights. Now, Listen Without Prejudice Volume 2, the case around it is ever so complex, but the gist of it, to simplify it, was that George sued his record company for not putting enough promotional weight behind Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1. And his record company counterclaimed that George hadn't put enough promotional weight himself behind Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1. So they were saying the same thing, but about each other.
They weren't being supportive of him. And I think they thought that he was kind of trying to sabotage what they were doing because he was refusing to appear in his music videos and he wasn't kind of playing ball. So I think it shows really the fact they were just really parting ways at this point. The relationship had broken down. And it turned out that the singles that he started writing for that record ended up not being used and they ended up going to charity. He donated them to charity. And then there was years of legal disputes where he was trying to get out of his contract with Sony. He eventually did, but at a loss to him. I think it was probably worth it in terms of his creativity.
George appealed but lost his case against Sony. During the years of the legal battle, his releases came through charity compilations, including a duet with Elton John for the song Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. In the 5.5-year gap, and under a special arrangement, he was allowed to perform a new song, Jesus to a Child, to raise funds for a children's charity. the song would be the lead single in a new deal with Virgin Records.
You smiled at me like Jesus to a child.
Jesus to a Child was about his lover, Anselmo Filippo, who was a Brazilian dancer that he'd met in Rio, who contracted the HIV virus and died from it.
Anselmo Filippo's death had a terrible influence on George's creativity. He couldn't write. He smoked an awful lot more dope. But when he came out of the grieving process, he'd written this gorgeous song, which is almost a hymnal tribute to his former lover. And it had the requisite Brazilian undertow, the gentle bossa nova feel of it, which is quite well hidden, but it makes it a better song, it makes it more dignified. And it's a moment, and there are several of these in George Michael's career, but it's a moment of absolute beauty.
He still dedicates that song to him to this day.
Oh, the love I still miss was Jesus to a child.
The single led the album Older, which became a huge commercial hit, especially in the UK, where it became his biggest seller to date. Its melancholic tone was captured in the third single, Spinning the Wheel, another song that spoke of the AIDS epidemic.
Spinning the Wheel was a really bold track as well at the time. It was kind of to do with someone who's worried about his partner getting AIDS because he's very sexually promiscuous. And I think at the time that was a really bold statement to make. Pop music wasn't written about that kind of thing.
He was seen as someone who had moved out of pure pop and trying to represent the other side, certainly of gay culture. It wasn't necessarily just the kind of, the fun side. He's representing some of the harsher realities that were happening at the time.
In 1998, George made the headlines for more notorious reasons. He was arrested for committing a lewd act in a public toilet in Beverly Hills. After being sentenced to community service, he made light of the incident with a video for his single, Outside.
I think I'm done with the sofa. I think I'm done with the hall. I think I'm done with the kitchen table, baby.
He had been arrested in a park in Beverly Hills, or the restrooms, for propositioning a policeman. And the policeman then, in a hilarious, truly American style, tried to sue him for compensation for the psychological damage of being propositioned by George Michael. I mean, just unbelievable, talk about money grabbing.
That could have been the end of his career. It was also hugely embarrassing for him at the time. But he turned that into this brilliant pop song, Outside. I think it's absolutely genius.
Take me to the places that I love best. And yes, I've been back.
His response was quite tongue-in-cheek and quite silly, like the video features him in a public toilet that turns into a discotheque and police uniforms. It's very camp-tastic. And it's probably the best response, really, that he could have made to it, because it showed that at least he had a sense of humour about the whole thing.
And that very much put the matter to bed, for want of a better phrase. And, of course, no one really cared that George Michael was gay.
In 2004, George re-signed with Sony for his first album of original material for 8 years, Patience. Although the album charted well internationally, it came under fire for the song Shoot the Dog, a track that criticised the US and UK for their military action in Iraq.
Shoot the Dog was a really controversial statement to make, and I remember it caused a huge fuss, the video kind of attacking George W. Bush and Tony Blair. At the time, you didn't do that, really, especially not George W. Bush. That seemed like quite a big deal to take on kind of the US government, but he did it.
The same thing happened with the Dixie Chicks, who's this all-American Nashville country band, and they just made some very minor comment about George Bush, and the whole world came crashing down on them. It seems a bit ridiculous. We do have free speech. Why should he be in favour of the war?
We have to remember that George's American following had essentially disappeared. And it wasn't a question of him being outed. It was going before then. The Americans didn't really understand Older in a way that they had actually understood Listen Without Prejudice. So he didn't have a market to lose. So it wasn't brave in that sense that he was betraying his American audience and sensibilities. It was brave in the fact that it's so few mainstream pop artists are prepared to make any kind of political statement for fear of upsetting someone.
One more pill, just one more beer.
George announced that Patience would be his last album and that he'd chosen to release new material through single downloads. Sporadically, he released cover versions for charity throughout the noughties. In 2012, to celebrate 30 years since Wham Rap, he produced a new song, White Light, inspired by his battle with pneumonia, an illness that gripped him in the year previously.
White Light was probably the very best of George's songs in recent years. It would certainly stand up alongside any of his great songs, and it shows that the songwriting well has not been permanently dredged.
George got to perform the song White Light at the London Olympics closing ceremony, but it was a brief highlight in what has been a troubling recent time for George Michael that has featured drug arrests and car accidents and left many fans hoping for him to make a triumphant return.
Everyone was kind of surprised when George Michael, being sort of very heavily druggy or being stoned all the time, or crashing his car and all this kind of stuff. It seemed odd. So I don't know if he's always been, you know, quite wild. But he seemed like someone who's very much in control of his career.
These kind of ridiculous tragicomic stories do seem to come out with an alarming regularity. And I think with anyone like that, once they stop matching those with great records, then it becomes a problem, because younger generations will only know you for those sort of stories.
I'd like to hear him just really intimate, just doing a kind of Johnny Cash type reinvention, having a comeback, making, you know, a really great record that kind of gets to the heart of him. And he's had such an interesting life, you know, from this boy band member through solo career. He's had a lot of pain in his life, and I think you could really get that on a record. I want to know who the real George Michael is now, and I think he could do that.